Although the Seder is a celebration of freedom, Judaism has a difficult time with being completely free. When we have freedom, there's a saying, it says, Ein ben chorin, there's no one who's free, elamisha osek b'Torah, someone who's studying Torah and someone who's bound by the Torah. So our freedom is still a freedom to follow the rules. So I'll tell you some of the rules of the Seder. Number one, you need 4 cups of wine. And if you can't drink wine, you could drink 4 cups of grape juice. And if you can't drink either wine or grape juice in its full strength, you could dilute it with a 1/3 being water. If you can't drink that, you only have to drink most of the cup. If you can't drink that, you could just drink 1 cheekful. And that's not so hard to do, and you should drink it while you're leaning to your left side. As far as eating matzah is concerned, matzah you're supposed to eat the equivalent of an olive. And an olive was, believe it or not, was also debated how big an olive was, whether their olives are greater than our olives or not. But simply, I would say that an olive is an olive is an olive, and therefore you eat the equivalent of what an olive would be, which is probably about 1/4 of a machine matzah or 1/6 of a handmade matzah when it's compressed, and it would take up not that much space, and it's really not that hard to eat. Again, the matzah you're supposed to eat leaning to your left, and you eat the matzah 3 times really. The first time you make the bracha, the blessing on the matzah, you eat it. Then you eat it with korech. You eat it with a sandwich with the maror, and you also then eat it for tzafun, for the afikomen. And each one of these times you have to eat the same amount of matzah. And when you eat the maror, it's also about the amount of an olive, and it's the amount of probably about 1 leaf if you're eating romaine lettuce or a regular lettuce, and that's good for maror. You do not need horseradish. Horseradish was probably eaten in Europe because they didn't have greens, they didn't have lettuce. Horseradish is probably not really what it meant when it said we should eat maror. But customs are that we eat horseradish. It makes us feel good that we suffer, and Jews like to suffer, so eat your maror, your horseradish with lettuce, but you should still eat about the equivalent of 1 olive's worth of lettuce, which is probably the equivalent of, if you crush it into 1 fluid ounce. The maror you do not eat while you're leaning, because it represents bitterness and slavery, and the leaning represents freedom. When you have the korech, there's different opinions, but probably best to eat it while you're leaning. And then the other real obligation of the night, besides, of course, making kiddush, which you have to, and the different blessings that you have and the blessings after the meal, are really the mitzvah of Magid, the commandment to tell over the story. And although we have Haggadah, which is sometimes burdensome for many people to read through the whole thing, you don't really have to read the whole Haggadah. Although I read it every year, it's a tradition, and it gives us, it's a formula, and it gives us the way to sort of start to express ourselves. It starts us off on that path. The real mitzvah is telling the story to either your children, to your guests, or to even to yourself. And that story could be told in many different ways. And it doesn't necessarily have to be exactly the formula that's laid out, but rather you could try to understand what the meaning of Pesach is to you, what the meaning of freedom is to you. How do you relate to the Torah? How do you relate to being Jewish? Any of these topics are really either directly or indirectly related to Pesach, and probably you'll fulfill the mitzvah, the commandment of Magid. You should probably just stick to at least the basics telling of the story of the Jews left Egypt, and we ate the matzah as we're leaving, and then you can go in many different directions. And because the ultimate purpose of this Seder is not just to fulfill commandments. It's not just to do what you're supposed to do, although that's what the Torah tells us to do. The goal is to really appreciate what Pesach is about. The goal is to appreciate what it means to be free. The goal is to appreciate the fact that God took us out of Egypt, gave us the Torah, and ultimately wants to redeem us and bring us back to the land of Israel as we are physically, and that all the Jews should return to the land of Israel and be able to worship God in its fullness.